Welcome to the Millennial Sandwich, a space for real conversations about millennials in the middle, not just of our own lives, but also of a caregiving sandwich. I'm Dr. Anitha Chandra, a geriatrician and expert in elder care.
And I'm Zara Hannawalt, a parenting journalist and expert in American motherhood. And even we don't have all the answers. Join us as we figure out life in the middle. Welcome back to the Millennial Sandwich, everyone. Today we're here with Saumya Dave. She is a psychiatrist, an author, a mental health advocate, and we're so happy to have you, Saumya. Can you introduce yourself a little bit more to our audience?
Yes, thank you for that wonderful introduction. As you were saying, Zara, I'm a psychiatrist, author of 3 novels, and a mental health advocate. I have my own private practice out of Brooklyn, where I live with my husband and 2 kids. And I'm currently working on my next nonfiction, or my first nonfiction book, and then my next novel. And then I also do a monthly segment on NBC News about mental health. So I have a little bit of a hybrid approach to work, which we can also talk about later, or I can answer questions if anyone's interested. But happy to be here and so excited for our conversation.
So you're a psychiatrist and a novelist. How did those worlds come together?
So for a long time, they actually didn't at all. And I don't know if anybody else had this experience. I'd love to hear from you both about that. But I was always told growing up to pick one thing and to do that and to be focused and to have a one track approach, quite frankly, to work. And so when I knew from a family of physicians, and that was something I was always very interested in, I knew I wanted to go into medicine. I also really loved reading books. I read a lot of Babysitters Club books. I read a lot of Sweet Valley High books. I read Nancy Drew. I read a lot of series now that I'm saying it out loud. But in these books, we had either one girl or a group of girls just going after things and wanting things and forming these friendships along the way. And these stories really inspired me. And so from a pretty young age, I had a far off dream of wanting to write a book. And when I would tell people that in the community that I grew up in, they would say, "Oh, that's sweet," or "That's so cute," or, maybe you can do that after you become a doctor and when you're older and when you retire from that job, you can do it. So I always saw writing and doctoring as these mutually exclusive entities and that they could never be combined. And then when I was in college and I was going through pre-med classes, I realized how consuming even pre-med felt, and obviously I hadn't even gotten to the medical school or residency part of it. I saw that a track like medicine was something that could take all of you, all of a person's time and energy, and for very good reason, by the way. But what I began to also realize is that if I did not actively make reading and writing a part of my life, I was very scared they would slip away. They would slip away, not because of any lack of love, but just because of the inertia of life and training and all of those things. And so I began researching the book industry. And at that time, when I was in college, it was really hard to find books that had characters that looked like my family and friends, looked like the people in the community that I grew up in. And there were these beautiful epics that were out there. Of course, there were some books, but it was hard to find books where people were going through issues with their parents or issues with significant others or just questions about self-discovery. So some of those things that were coming up in conversations with my friends. And it was a craving actually for stories like that inspired me to write my first book. And Well-Behaved Indian Women the writing process started in 2008, and I didn't get a publishing deal till 2018. So I was rejected over 200 times along the way. And along that time, I then went through med school. I was in the last year of my residency when I got a book deal, but I realized that I could actually do these two things together. It just might require kind of thinking things in an out of box type of way that I hadn't had modeled for me before. So a lot of this has been learning as I've gone along. And then to my great surprise, I practice 3 days a week and I write 2 days a week. I write and do media work 2 days a week. And it's actually for the first time in my whole life that I feel like there's space for all of the types of work that I want to do. So the advice that I actually got about, do one thing and don't focus on anything else, that advice didn't work for me. So it really taught me to be mindful about the advice that we get, even well-meaning advice, and to know that not all advice is actually meant for us. And we might actually have to carve our way when we're trying to pursue the things that really light us up.
Are you a firstborn daughter?
Is it so obvious? Are you? You are? Both of you are? Okay.
First and last,
but
yeah.
that's an eldest daughter. There is such a thing to that, isn't there?
So much, yes. And
It is so real.
doing what they tell you to do until you are able to make the decision. I mean, yeah. So much of that is guilt, which is what we want to talk to you about today.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. And so much of, I think, being an eldest daughter has to do with the sense of responsibility you feel. And this It's making the other people in your life happy or satisfied or maybe both, and then kind of figuring out, well, where am I in all of that?
Yeah. And I think we talk a lot about mom guilt culturally, but we really don't talk about daughter guilt. And I know
My
you've
gosh.
touched on that a lot in your work. Do you have any overarching insights on daughter guilt to kind of kick off the conversation?
Sure. So one thing that I learned was that guilt is a really interesting emotion. I mean, one of the reasons I wanted to write a novel that explored what we call mom guilt, and really it ended up being how you said daughter guilt and overall women's guilt, is because there's so many layers to what we call guilt. One of the researchers whose work I was looking at actually divided guilt into unproductive guilt and productive guilt, which I found really helpful. And also, by the way, when I was looking up guilt as an emotion, I found different categories of guilt, which I also found to be very, very helpful because I think even when I talk about it, I'll say, oh, this person feels guilty or we feel guilt about this, but all guilt is not created equally. And that's been a helpful reminder, even recently. But unproductive guilt is guilt that's actually not aligned with our values, but it's more of an emotional muscle memory. So if someone told us that caring for ourselves is selfish, or we saw that modeled for us, we saw caregivers never care for themselves. So we internalize that as being selfish when we put ourselves first. We might feel guilty when we advocate for ourselves or make time for ourselves. But if a friend told us they were doing that, we would probably not tell that friend, you should feel really bad about caring for yourself. So that's unproductive guilt. Productive guilt is guilt that's aligned with our values. So when we know that we're doing something that really isn't in line with who we want to be and who we are. So if we do something that's really stepping out of line for us, if we're in a heated moment and we say something we want to take back, those types of guilt, I think, take us closer to who we are. Whereas the other type maybe keeps us rooted in old patterns of believing. When it comes to daughter guilt, so much of that I think is shaped told growing up and also what we were modeled and what we were rewarded for. I think the latter two sometimes get lost in the conversations, but if we were rewarded for keeping our needs very small and for doing really well and for never taking up a lot of space and for never being, my gosh, selfish, which is maybe the worst thing that some people feel like they could be, then we feel like we've done a good job and we get positive reinforcement from that. And then if we also had caregivers or adults in our environments who were martyrs and selfless and also giving in and maybe people pleasing, that I think also gets absorbed. So I think there are a lot of layers even to daughter guilt and then that sense of responsibility that we were just talking about. So if we leave that, that can bring up a lot of guilt. But yeah, I think there's so many sides to it. So every time guilt comes up in a conversation, what I find myself always saying is that it deserves to be looked at with curiosity and compassion. It deserves to really, really be looked at because it's not all good and it's not all bad, but it is telling us something,
Yeah, just like every other emotion.
right?
I know in the guilt pill, it's sort of a new mom who has a career, who is a daughter with aging parents. The guilt is probably always there for us, right? Throughout our lives. Do you
Totally.
find that in this particular life stage is when we notice it and when things feel harder to manage?
What I do think happens is that when we have more on our plates, I think that sometimes our patience runs low. And so some things can come to the surface that maybe we were able to mask before, or maybe we were able to power through and work through before and compensate for before, which by the way, maybe those weren't good things because we might have pushed ourselves past our limits over and over again. But I do think when we constantly have things taxing us, a lot of times it sort of pushes things to the surface in a way that maybe didn't have to happen before. In addition to that, I think, honor the name of your wonderful podcast too. I think the millennial generation is maybe the first to really be looking at things from this emotional lens and asking what's the emotional price we're paying for some of these things and what are the emotional consequences long term that we're paying for this, whether it's in ourselves or even intergenerationally. And so I think it's actually the combination of those things that come up. So a lot of people I meet with in their 30s and 40s, they're really looking at a lot of the choices they've made, the way they're living their lives, and actually asking these really big questions. But I think it's for a variety of really powerful reasons.
What's interesting is I work in women's media, and there are, like, if you ever read a Cosmo magazine, those cover interviews, they always ask, what's your guilty pleasure? And that's a question that we get
Yes.
all the time as women. What's your guilty pleasure? And I just as like a little exercise one day, I asked my husband and he just kind of gave me this look and he's like, I don't know, nobody's ever asked me that. And it's so
Wow. Isn't that
interesting
so telling?
how, yeah, the messages we send to women about how they should feel guilty, even like the phrase no guilt snack, or there's just
So
all these
true.
messages everywhere for us
And
that tell us,
the
yeah,
answers are just like
yeah.
things like, oh, I like to watch reality TV. Why do you feel guilty about watching reality TV? And why are we wired to think that that's something we should feel guilty about?
Have you ever heard a
So
man say
true.
he feels guilty about watching sports?
Not once.
It's almost the opposite, right? Where it's
Yeah.
we need this many hours on a Sunday and we can maybe even make it a group thing. And this is going to be on television and it's so important. I don't, did you by any chance get targeted for those memes or videos about how when you really think about sports and men watching sports, it actually shows how we will value what their hobbies are because we take out, right? Everything gets accommodated around the watching of this. And I'm not even saying it's a bad thing. It's just maybe even something we learn from to have that permission for ourselves and to be able to know that it's okay, whatever that might be for us, whether it's reality television or something else.
Do you think we need to be talking more about son guilt and dad guilt as well? Or do you think they're given enough attention
Are they
culturally?
even feeling that?
I think those are really great questions. I will say, so one of the books I read for research for the guilt pill, I read a lot of nonfiction actually for research for the fiction, which was really fun and unexpected. But one of the books was called Mother Brain by Chelsea Conaboy. And what she actually talked about is that when men and dads, when they get paternity leave, they actually experience the same changes in their brains as moms when they're on maternity leave. And so a lot of things that we even called mom brain, which is often not a flattering term, by the way. And so
Mhm.
also in the language of what we need to revisit, I think that should be in there. But a lot of those changes actually happening through care work. So the daily showing up, the waking up for the feeds in the middle of the night, the feeling stressed, the anticipating needs, the being very vigilant to changes in a cry. And so when dads go through that, they also experience those changes. And it's so funny, there have been more reports of dads feeling dad guilt when they're involved in the caregiving. And so I think it really shows how important care work is for all of us and how essential it actually is. None of us would be here without somebody having cared for us and continuing to do so. But it's work that's often seen as undervalued job and just kind of throwaway, taken for granted job when literally it runs the world. And so I do think as we get more sons and more dads and more men participating in caregiving labor and seeing it as essential, I do think we'll start to hear son guilt, dad guilt. I will say it's one of my favorite things my husband says is when he says, every time he has to travel for work, he says, I feel dad guilt. I'm like, I love
Love
you.
that.
Thank you. But it's something I'm hearing more now, and I did not hear as much growing up. And I do wonder if the participation in the actual labor of it is what plays into it, because it comes from a place of wondering if you're showing up in the way that you need to be showing up for your family. And so I think when someone feels invested in that plays into the guilt part of it too.
On the sort of flip side, when you gave all those examples, my first feeling when I heard, personally, I did not wake up when my kids cried. My husband woke up. I truly thought there was something wrong with me because I felt so much guilt that I didn't have that instinctual, like, I'm gonna wake up to my kids cry. My husband has taken over a lot of those things, and I'm like, I don't cook every day. I don't do a lot of the traditional things that society has told me I should be doing, but I feel guilt in the opposite way, feeling like I should miss my kids when I'm away, and I don't really miss my kids when I go away. I just don't. I feel so much guilt even, like, saying that out loud, and I just wonder how it's just in our brains for so
Yeah.
long. I don't even know how to unlearn any of that.
I think you bring up such a good point about the relationship between guilt and performance too. There's also this idea that a mother feels these things and then says these things and expresses these things when really a mother can be whoever she wants to be. And in every phase of parenting, that might mean different things, and that's perfectly wonderful. But I think we have these ways societally where we're like, if you leave, of course you miss your kids. Actually, many people I meet do not miss their kids when they leave because they're thinking, wow, I get to have adult conversation and actually focus on whatever's in front of me for these days. And that's lovely. And so, yeah, I think we need to normalize a full spectrum of experience that is around parenting, around caregiving, even around how we show up in other spaces outside of the parenting and children related ones that are all perfectly acceptable. That idea of also what we call a maternal instinct is also now being challenged, which I love. Because right, it's actually that, yeah, if you are able to sleep when you're postpartum, that's amazing. That's
Mhm.
amazing. That should actually be more of a goal that we actually tell new birthing parents, right? But instead we say, oh, you're going to lose the sleep, you're going to be getting up, you're going to be vigilant. And while that might happen for some people, I think going for health and going for feeling well and feeling present and feeling like yourself, whatever that might look like, should really be the types of conversations that we have. But I do think even in 2026, we have these ideas about what a mother should be doing and should not be doing. And those are things that I'm happy to see people challenging, whether
Mhm.
they're mothers, fathers, whether they're child free, wherever they might be.
Yeah. I had a few people tell me in the first week postpartum that mom guilt is just inevitable and it's part of the experience and it's something that I'm
Yes.
going to always feel. I had a lot of guilt because I have twins and one of them was in the NICU and one of them came home with me. And I felt tremendous guilt because I couldn't be with both of them at once. And I also felt a lot of guilt for not feeling as torn up about that as I felt like I should have felt. And anytime I expressed that to someone, they would just say, "Oh, that's just part of being a mom." Do you think that it's just part of being a mom, or do you think that's more of the societal expectations that have been put on us?
I think it's both. So I do think the societal expectations play such a huge role. And then also what you described as feeling guilt about, right, the different situations with both your babies. Is it just a big sign that you care? That you
Mhm.
care and that you're invested, and then also that maybe you can look forward and then see that there are other things that are gonna come into right front and center, and so I wonder if sometimes what we even call guilt is actually a sign that we really care, or if we feel less than we think we should. Again, should is an interesting word, every time it comes up. But if we feel less, then actually is it a sign that we know that maybe there's some self-trust, maybe there are other things to focus on that are right in front of us, and maybe that's great. So even the labeling, I think, is a really interesting thing to visit, but definitely the societal expectations. I got the same exact advice as you, Zara. I was told you're just going to feel it, and I remember thinking I'm not going to feel it. I was warned about it, so I'm going to journal and
Yeah.
be grateful and all of those things. And so the reason that I actually was inspired to write the guilt pill is because after my son was born, my older son, I did feel it, and it was such an overwhelming emotion that even as I was doing the things that I thought were right to do and okay to do, I still felt it. And so this fantasy came to be of what if I could write a pill for people in my private practice to turn it off for 4 to 6 hours? What would they do? Would they at least breathe a little bit more easily? That's really where it came from. But yeah, I almost wonder if the way we even talk about it and the labels we put on it, if even that would change the conversation a little bit. And even in the way people talk to themselves that, oh, this is a sign I care. This is a sign I know what to prioritize. This is a sign that this isn't actually taking up that much weight right now. And maybe that's okay.
And that seems like a very millennial thing, right? The need to kind
Yes.
of express everything and define what you're feeling at
Mhm.
all times. Do you think we're putting more pressure on ourselves emotionally by doing that?
I think we are putting a lot of pressure on ourselves. I think we put a lot of pressure on ourselves collectively to do really well. And one of the things I have heard again and again, and this is actually from a lot of friends, not even clinical work, but I've heard a lot of friends be so aware of the emotional impact of maybe their parents not being as emotionally aware of certain dynamics and certain patterns and behavioral systems and things like that. And so they will have it at the forefront of their mind that I don't want to do this. This was done to me. I want to make sure that the kids around me, they don't experience any version of this. So I'm going to be like this. And so the amount of pressure that they put on themselves in the macro and also the micro. I'm going to control my tone of voice. I'm going to always have a smile on my face. I'm going to be cheery. If they want to play with me for 2 hours, I'm going to try. And I do think that it is causing a lot of stress. I think it's making it hard for a lot of people to give themselves grace because the fact that they're even thinking about themselves is showing that they're probably doing an incredible job of showing up for their families and themselves every single day. But we're at an interesting inflection point where I think there's a lot of emotional awareness. And then there are a lot of tools given to us on social media, online, I mean, in conversations with loved ones. And so a lot of people I know are finding and seeking all of these different things to keep being better. I think we're also in an optimization time where the thought is always, how can I do more? How can I be more? How can I make this even better and better? And the act of just being and letting ourselves be human and to maybe have flaws and to sometimes make mistakes and to maybe let things just be and to surrender. I think those things can get lost because we're really just trying so hard to do it well, to do it really well. I think it comes from a very well-meaning place.
Do you find that high achieving people tend to experience guilt differently or more often?
So one of the reasons I had to make my the personality that I did is because so there's a reproductive psychiatrist, Dr. Alexander Sachs, and she's written a lot about the early postpartum period. And one of the things she talked about is how high achieving women can have some of the most difficult transitions into early motherhood because for a long time, when they have worked really hard, they get results. they get results. So if they work really hard at their jobs, they will probably get good performance reviews. They will probably advance. They will probably be seen as the best person to work with. Motherhood doesn't always work out that way. Even if you read all the books and even if you follow all the right people on social media, your baby might not sleep. Your baby might not feed. Feeding overall actually just might be different than what you had anticipated. And so a lot of things will not be correlated to the amount of work that's put in. A lot of things won't follow a plan, and that can be very destabilizing, I think, for a lot of high achieving women. And so yeah, when I found out that that was a particular who might have a harder time. It really clicked so much for me into place personally, but then made a lot clear for me when it came to Maya because I knew that I needed someone who thought that her hard work would almost be a security blanket for her and a type of armor for her that could shield her from all the things she was scared of. And she really has to face herself when she sees that when you have a baby, that just really might not happen. It might not. There's so many other forces at play that are out of a person's control, but that deeply influence your parenting experience too.
What actually happens mentally when we're constantly like role switching within the same day from work to mother to daughter to caregiver to partner? What
All
happened?
our different types of work too.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I think we're seeing a lot of burnout and I think we're seeing a lot of exhaustion. And, I don't know if you've seen this yet, but I feel like when people are hitting those years of perimenopause or menopause, they're also finding, right, that maybe the patience that they had for those things and the ability to mask or to push through or to work through those things, like literally just through brute force, they're running out because it's taken a toll for too long. And so they're also facing themselves in these ways. But I think we are finding that people are emotionally very exhausted, very, very exhausted. And we're asking a lot of times one person, many times one woman, to switch between so many roles where this woman will likely be an emotional manager and a leader and a guide for so many different types of people. And there's only so much one human being can take. So I think that we're starting to see people really hit their limits and realize that this has been going on for far too long. What's interesting is that and I'd love to hear from both of you about this, is that I'm also finding that a lot of people I'm meeting with, their moms also have had too much on their plates for a long time, but because the emotions weren't talked about in the same way, they either were suppressed or they came out in different forms. They came out in different forms and being irritable and being burnt out and wanting to just talk with their friends or their family members or escape. Now we have the tools for it and the words. And so I think we're seeing a manifestation that's different. But I think about my own mom who has been taking care of multiple generations of people for so long. And of course she's been stressed for so long, but I don't think she was given permission to even access that language for herself. This was just how it was and how it was supposed to be.
Have you been able to have those conversations with her since you're doing your work?
All the time, all the time. We talk about it all the time, and it's actually a pretty regular part of our conversations, which I really, really appreciate. And I think it's causing her to also notice what she and her friends have been doing for a long time. So she'll even say, "Oh, when we get together, everybody feels the need to make these meals and to cook, and then to let have the men eat, and then we clean up. And I'm now going to be putting a stop to that." And so it's really beautiful to actually see it play out in a different generation. But it also makes me know that their generation deserved those tools as well and that advocacy as well. They just maybe didn't have the opportunity for that.
And being daughters of immigrants, it seems like all of us are daughters of immigrants. It adds
Right?
the extra layer
It
So
does.
to
many extra
everything.
layers.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes. And when you're in survival mode, whether you're right, an immigrant, a child of an immigrant or not, I think when you're in survival mode, it's very hard to access those tools for yourself. I think it's very hard because you're just trying to get through and you're just trying to make it. So survival mode, I think, makes it hard, no matter what, to access those things that can help us get out of that. It feels like a cruel trap, actually.
Soumya, I love so much of the work you've put on Instagram about friendship and how it changes in your 30s and 40s. It's really beautiful and it's really
Thank
I,
you.
I really feel it because as millennials, I think we've really rewritten a lot of societal norms. And so maybe you're 35 and your best friend is like married with kids and your other best friend is single and going on Tinder dates. And, we're all just in different places, literally and in a more abstract way as well. Do you see a lot of friendship guilt in women around our age too?
I see a lot of friendship guilt and I see a lot of friendship grief. I see a lot of friendship grief. And sometimes grief and guilt can be, presenting together, sometimes not. But I will see a lot of friendship grief because I think what has happened is that people are getting busier and busier and I think people are getting more overwhelmed. And then there's this interesting irony happening where people are on their screens more than ever. So they might be seeing what their friends are doing and they might even be kind of connecting with those friends with a message or a meme or a reel, which by the way, all those things can have their value, but those in-person interactions where you're having those in the moment conversations, where you're being vulnerable, where you're having fun and you're really being in the moment, I think those are harder to come by as people are becoming more and more overwhelmed. And so what I'm finding myself telling even the people I'm meeting with and then even myself is that we have to actually prioritize that more because there's every reason to actually not do that. There's every reason to not do that. I think if you're tired, if you're burnt out, if your work hours are long, if you have a phone in front of you and so you can entertain yourself for a long time and you don't even realize how much time has passed, which I think has happened to all of us with the doom scrolling, we can, if any of those moments could be substituted with actually a call or FaceTime with a friend, we would probably feel better. We'd probably feel better, but it requires this active stepping out of where we're at. And I think that's really tough. I think that's really, really hard. So I have seen grief happen for how friendships change with different life stages and with moving. And like you were saying, also, when one friend is in a different life stage than another, that will change the dynamics and the parameters of how often you're able to communicate, how you're able to communicate. And so I think that readjustment and that tuning and the revisiting of friendships is a very necessary thing, but it's also something that can be, I think, really tough. When we're growing up and we're in school and we're in college, our friends are right there. They're right there. They're built in.
Yeah.
I've seen studies that show that we need anywhere from 50 to 200 hours to become good friends with someone. And when we think about our adult lives, a lot of times we're working on our own, right? And then we're going home, then we're doing the things we need to at home. I mean, those are a lot of hours. Those are a lot of
Mhm.
hours that used to be built into the ecosystem of our days. And now we have to go out and proactively make those hours happen. So it's asking a lot of effort from people. But it is effort that I found 9 out of 10 times, if not more, makes people feel better. The number of times I've heard someone say, "I felt like staying in. I felt like just staying in my PJs and not going out into the cold and just not being outside and doing all that." When they push past that discomfort and they go to meet that friend or group of friends for dinner, they always come back telling me, "I'm so glad I did that. I'm so glad I pushed past that, like, inclination to cancel and to just stay in my comfort zone that night."
So I hang out with my friends a lot. I go out to
Love
dinner.
it. Give us all the
I
tips.
get it.
Yeah.
Like I do lots of things, and then I feel super guilty that I'm not at home.
Mm.
And my husband has never made any indication that I should feel guilty. My kids too, but is it just inevitable that no matter what decision I make, I'm going to feel guilt from somewhat like how do we alleviate this feeling that I'm not doing enough in some aspect because of the choices I'm making? Because I still want
I
to
No
hang
way, I
don't
feel the
Yeah.
opposite. I feel
yeah.
guilty that I don't have enough of a social life and I don't see my friends enough.
Well, actually, I think what you both said beautifully illustrates the reality, which is that I don't know if we actually alleviate the feeling. I think we actually deal with it being there, with it being present, and it being really uncomfortable, and it probably being aggravating at times and really frustrating. So it might even go beyond uncomfortable, but we accept that it will always be there, and we sit with that discomfort, right? Even a lot of when we think about a lot of work that happens in therapy, it actually has to do with how do we sit with discomfort and how do we accept that multiple things are true at the same time, as frustrating as that can be. And every time we make a choice to do something, we are saying no to doing 5 to 10 other things, likely in that moment. And maybe that's a part of life, actually, right? If we don't respond to this text and we instead spend time with people and we put away our phone, we're missing out on responding to those things. If we go and hang out with this group, we're not hanging out with these people in our lives. And so everything actually is a trade-off. And I am learning this even in my own life that maybe that's a constant. Maybe that's a constant. Maybe that discomfort and that even regret and those feelings of what if, maybe those are also constants. And there's no way we can actually live 10 lives at the same time. That limitation is actually part of what makes us human.
I think our generation is really bad at being uncomfortable in so many ways, but especially in this boundary heavy culture, we just are kind of told like you should never feel uncomfortable. You should just cut
Yeah.
off everything that makes you feel uncomfortable.
Oh,
What do
wait,
you
tell me more. I'm so curious. Yeah, say more. Cause so you
Yeah,
feel like because of boundaries, we're like, bye bye if something feels not great.
yes, with friendships, with family. When we started this conversation about how we want to care for our parents gave us so much and we want to give them love and attention and care. And it is hard. It's hard and it's heavy and it has impacts on the rest of our lives that we're carrying. Immediately, the feedback that we heard from people on TikTok or whatever it is was like,
And in
"Oh,
real life.
you don't owe them anything. Cut just you don't owe anyone
Yeah.
anything. Make yourself the priority," which is fine for some people, but it's also not the answer. And I just feel like we're hearing so much of like, just set boundaries, just set boundaries. You're number one. Your kids are the only people who matter. And
And your
yeah,
kids won't owe you anything when they're grown up too.
yeah,
I hear a lot of
Yeah.
that.
That is so true and so interesting. And I wonder if what a lot of us are finding, and by the way, I think there's a cultural part to this as well, that right,
100%.
like advice, really advice can't be one size fits all because there are contexts in place for all people. And so I do find the advice, a lot of the advice that does well on social media and in these short sound bites, I often find that it's advice that can't apply to everybody because true advice has to take in the person and their ecosystem and their culture and their family and all these different things into account. But yeah, I totally agree with you. And I wonder, are we finding actually that we do owe people things? We are interconnected. And in order to be connected with other human beings, they might owe us some things and we might owe them some things, even if those things are grace and compassion and openness and curiosity. So I wonder if we're starting to see that those types of, advice and those bites are just actually not really holding up to even how we feel and what we want our futures to look like. So I also wonder if we have given this collective permission to ghosting, and it's come up in all different types of relationships. I know that I heard ghosting first in the romantic sense when people would say to me like, oh, this date, I never heard from them again. But I do feel like ghosting has come up in friendships, ghosting has come up with familial relationships, and so there's this permission almost given to just leave. And I do think it's making people lonelier. I will say that I think people
Yeah.
are also getting lonelier and realizing that's not actually forming the deep, meaningful, fulfilling relationships that I think make us happier and make us feel more in connection with one another.
Yeah. And there's a lot of research emerging now about the health benefits of female friendships, right?
Yes, there's a lot of research around friendships in general and the health benefits female friendships. I've seen multiple things about how cortisol levels and stress levels go down, right? When you're just talking to a friend and you're just letting out your emotions. And so there are a lot of benefits. I mean, I every single person I've ever met has told me about multiple times where they've met with a friend who just gets it and they feel better after being around that friend. And so I think we do need each other. And it's hard because where do we draw that line between relying on ourselves, being the most for ourselves, and then also being completely dependent on someone else? I think there's also, just like we were talking about before, with there always being regret or things we're missing out on, there might always also be an oscillation between how much do we let people in, how much do we rely on ourselves, and what does that mean? In different seasons, that might also look different.
yeah. One of the things I love about our generation and our friendships is how honest we are with each other with our struggles and
Yes.
what things really look like. And I know, my mom has friends and her family even who are the closest people in her life, and she talks to them 100 times a day. But do they actually talk about what things really look like? No, it's very different. And I
Hmm.
think I love that about being able to text my group chat. My daughter's being crazy. This is what she did, and this is what I did. And whoops, that probably wasn't the right thing. And them telling me, yeah, that probably wasn't the right thing, but we've all been there is so validating. And it really makes you feel like I'm part of something bigger. I'm not
Yes,
doing this by myself. I mean, that's the good side of being connected all the time that I wish
totally.
like I feel bad that my mom's generation didn't have that because that's really special and helpful.
That's also what you're speaking to makes me think of vulnerability and how it's so
Mm,
powerful in making us feel less alone in our struggles. Because I think a lot of times when there is a good facade presented, or we're not sharing all the tough things, maybe the things that might bring shame or discomfort or self doubt, we can also then feel more and more alone in those things. And that can be even tougher than experiencing just the thing itself, feeling alone in our feelings. So having those vulnerable conversations and being really honest. And then also knowing that if you make a mistake of some sort or you did something that maybe you didn't want to do, you're still loved and you're still accepted. I think that tells us so much, right? About how
yeah.
we're allowed to be human and then we're allowed to return.
I've been really excited to talk to you about the Babysitters Club and Sweet Valley books because I was a super fan of both, and I know you were a fan too. How do you
Yes.
think those book series shaped a generation of millennial women who like us, so many were super fans.
So it wasn't apparent to me while I was reading the books. I started them in elementary school and then went beyond as the series gathered. But I think that having a group of girls who were so passionate about babysitting, knowing they were the best at it in their town, knowing they had a system was so empowering, even if I didn't, again, realize it at the time. They had a process. You had to call them. Marianne had to check the calendar to see who was available. They had even a play kit, a play kit that was tailored for each age group that they were going to go babysit. And then they had a business line that was Claudia Kishi's bedroom, her own landline that she had. And so it felt very empowering to see this group just take their work so seriously. And of course, the group itself was had a bunch of people in it, but there were dyads in the group. So Christy and Marianne being the quintessential best friends from the beginning of the series. And for anybody who didn't read it, Christy is described as this tomboy, and she's got these leadership traits from the very beginning. And Marianne is more bookish and introverted.
Mhm.
She ends up becoming the club secretary, but they're best friends, and they show up for each other. They root for each other. And then throughout the book series, you have other kind of partnerships happening between two or three of the girls in the group, and they just really show up for each other. And so I think seeing that was really amazing from a young age. Now, I don't know if you felt this way, but I didn't relate to Sweet Valley High or Sweet Valley Twins at all. I did not have blonde hair and aquamarine eyes as they were described as having, and my parents were
Perfect
not
size
as
6
cool.
bodies.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right, in every way. Their parents were cool with everything. That was not my experience in the house I
No.
was growing up in. So I think that series actually was this portal into another world, and I found that really interesting. But Sweet Valley also had this friend group, like this group that had been living in the same place for years and years. And so feeling like you're part of this dynamic and getting a look into it was really fun. How about for you? What did you love about those series?
Hey, so I loved Claudia in Babysitter's Club. I felt very represented by her as this Asian girl who didn't really fit the mold. I agree. I didn't ever feel like I could relate to Sweet Valley, but I have always had a little bit of a fascination with twins. Now I have twins
Ooh,
myself.
I love that. You have twins and you read Sweet Valley Twins.
Yeah. Sweet Valley, the Olsen twins, the Parent Trap. I
Yes.
loved the twin thing. But I think Sweet Valley was so interesting too because it was really this good girl, bad girl dichotomy between Jessica and
Yes.
Elizabeth. And I know Francine Pascal, the author, has said that she fully expected everyone to root for Elizabeth, but when the books came out, they were actually really rooting for Jessica,
Which is so
which
interesting,
is,
right?
yeah, because
Why do you
she's
think
kind
that
of
is?
the maybe Elizabeth was just too perfect and
Hmm.
too much of what we had been told that we needed to be. And
Oh,
Jessica was a little bit more selfish and
maybe
tapped
she's
into
who we wanted
something.
permission to be.
Exactly. Yeah. The confidence and the selfishness and the
I love that. And the messy room. I always
Mhm.
remembered her bed was unmade. They had the same bedspreads, but then Jessica's bed was unmade and Elizabeth's bed was made. Oh, we should reread those. That would be really interesting.
We should, we
We
should,
should.
but the beauty standard piece of those books is, I think, really worth talking about today.
Yes, yes. So it sounds like you also took note of every time they described the blonde hair and the aquamarine eyes and the size 6 bodies and, right, all of those things that were just
Mhm.
shown as this aspirational way to look.
Yeah, and then I don't know if you know this, but when they rebooted the books a few years later, they changed them to size 4 bodies.
Oh, really? I did not know that. Wow. Wow. Did you ever watch the show? There was a show on for a little
I
bit.
did, and my daughter and I watched the Babysitters Club show on Netflix, which is actually really good.
It's so good. Thank you for
Yeah.
mentioning that. It is so, so good. You watched it together?
Uh-huh.
So
That's like
special.
a
She loves
mother-daughter
it.
dream. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's like your childhood coming back and it all being this
I
beautiful
try
full
to do that.
circle.
I try to make my kids watch Full House and they don't love it yet. And I'm gonna keep trying because
Yeah, they'll get there.
that is my whole framework of what life is supposed to look like is the Tanner house. And that's
Yeah.
very different than what things actually look like. The premise is, Danny's wife died and her brother and his
Mhm.
friend come into the home and create this village for them to support him. That would not happen in I mean, there is no woman there. I don't see
Mhm.
how that dynamic would actually happen, and it's just so interesting that when we watched it, we're like, "Oh, yeah, this makes total sense."
Mhm.
Where were the women who were supporting them that would actually make this real?
In some ways, though, I wonder if it's both like what you said, that where are the women who would actually be making this happen? And then is it potentially ahead of its time, where it's having the men do all the work and to make it to figure it out, even if they flail along the way. Like, I actually wonder how a show like that would do today. Would we think that it's completely unrealistic and we wouldn't give it a chance or not? It's so, and you're so right. When it was on when we were younger, we're like, yeah, of course, this is the family.
Yeah. Yeah.
This is
Well,
who they
it's also
are.
interesting because I don't know if two people would move in with a single mom to help her.
Yeah.
That's such a good point. Like, if we gender swapped it, what would it look like?
Mhm.
Like, would it even exist? That's a really good question.
Yeah, there were so many single
So
moms
true.
in the media that we watched as children in the 90s,
Lorelai.
and yeah, and no one was wondering, "Where is her help?" Like, no one.
Mhm. Where's her village?
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
so true. Okay, this is a good episode on its own, like
Yeah.
the
Oh,
90s
yeah. We get
Yeah.
parenting
into
on
these, like,
shows.
it's about I mean, we are both very pop culture obsessed.
So fun. Did you see that there's a book coming out about Blair Waldorf in her 40s?
Oh my gosh, no.
Yeah.
I can't wait.
Okay, you'll have to discuss that too
Yes.
when it
Yeah.
comes.
I was saying that friendships are obviously so important when we're young. We see a lot of that when we're young, and maybe that fades in a little bit into the background or just kind of goes into texts or FaceTimes whenever you have time when we're in this young parenthood phase. But I see in healthy aging in my patients, the patients who are doing best and who are the most resilient and who are able to adapt to society are those who have fostered those friendships. So as it has real meaning and impact on how you're aging and how you can adapt to what happens physically to your body as you age if you know how to foster friendships and maintain relationships with those around you. And I think when we watch those things about blue zones and places in the world where older adults are more independent and less reliant on what society can give back to them, it's because they have really put in the energy and their society has put in the energy and the resources to maintain those communities and relationships.
Such a good point, and I think an important reminder for all of us, these are health investments.
Mhm.
These are health investments, and maybe if we saw them that way, then that could even change the way we approach them in the first place. I also, this is random, I promise it's related. I also wonder if we've raised the stakes when it comes to the pressure we were talking about at the beginning that we put on ourselves. But if our houses could be messy and we didn't prepare, we didn't make something, but a friend just came and we met each other as we were, whatever that means.
Mhm.
If we're in our sweats and there are magnetiles everywhere
Yeah.
and
Or
the
doing
dishes are
nothing.
this.
You don't
Yeah.
need we want couch friends. We want friends who show up
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
you do nothing. You just sit in
Mhm.
silence
Yes.
if you want, and it's fine because it doesn't have to be a month down the line. "Are you free for this dinner at this new restaurant?" "Oh, I might not be free because I don't have to," and then you end up not seeing each
Yeah.
other, but instead, just show up.
Just
Just show
show
up
Mhm.
up.
and sit there.
Yes, yes.
That's all we need. I find that parenting is also easier when there's just another human being there. And I don't know why. My husband's also a physician. When he's on call, I get this feeling of anxiety. I
Yeah.
need another adult there, even if they're not helping.
Yeah.
It's just being around people, you just go less crazy. I don't know.
Totally. I need a
Yeah.
ratio. I need an adult to child
Yes.
ratio that feels
Mhm. Yeah, my husband travels a lot for work, and I just dread it every time he goes because everything feels harder. Like, making
it
dinner
does.
feels harder or getting the kids to bed feels harder. Yeah, we
And
need
Oh,
other
it
adults.
does.
I'm a meaner mom, which also makes me feel really guilty because
Guilty. Mm.
I think my fuse is just a lot shorter when I feel like I'm the only one here. I don't even
Yeah.
really know where that comes from, but yeah, I'm if I have someone else there, I find myself to be maybe it's performative too. Who knows? Of just feeling like I'm gonna be more even keel and more chill and I'll give them a little bit more grace. But when I'm alone, they do something and I'm
Mhm.
yelling and I'm like, oh no, why am I yelling? Like, why am I yelling? I don't need to be yelling, but it's happening.
I think there's just a lot more that's the load is just heavier on us,
Yeah.
emotionally and then of course logistically. And so that can affect our fuse, our patience, everything.
Yeah. This is such a great conversation. I want to ask, do you have a millennial sandwich survival tip for our listeners?
Ooh, a millennial sandwich survival tip. That's a really good one. So, okay, this actually relates to some of the parts of our conversation. But my best friend, she lives in New Jersey. It's not far from New York, but it feels far. We don't get to talk all the time, but we leave each other voice notes every day about things that are random and even maybe feel insignificant to anybody who would listen to them. And that has really gotten me through many, many days, just hearing her voice, hearing her describe a frustrating thing that happened at the grocery store, and then something happened with her kids, and then something happened with her husband. And it feels very low stakes. It feels like you can just do it in the moment. There's no performance or planning involved. But that has really helped me feel connected with her. And also like I'm in the day to day with her, not just in the catch ups with her, like you were describing with the dinner to be scheduled. So I would say that. And then I started doing that with my parents, but they don't know how to leave voice notes back. But even being able to just tell them those things has actually helped with the connection part of it. So I think more connection, the things that help with more connection have helped me feel like I'm surviving a little bit better.
Amazing. And if you haven't
Yeah.
read The Guilt Pill and if you have resonated with any of this conversation, you should pick it up because I think I was on chapter 3
Mhm.
when I texted Zara like it's already
Everything we talk about.
everything we talked about has already been addressed in the first 3 chapters. It's just like partner guilt, daughter guilt, mom guilt, everything. I felt very seen. Where can our
Thank
listeners
you.
find your book?
So it's sold wherever books are sold. On my website, saumyadave.com, there's a link to a lot of the major retailers. And then I'm on Instagram at saumyajdave.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Thank you. This
you.
was so wonderful.